Letter was sitting on my kitchen table when I got home from my shift at the pharmacy. I almost didn't open it. It had that formal look, the kind of envelope with the return address printed in a font that means business, not birthday wishes. I set down my coat, put the kettle on, and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Then I picked it up. My daughter's name was on the return address, her married name, the one she took when she married my son-in-law 6 years ago. I read it 3 times before I understood what it was saying. She was applying for a peace bond against me. Her mother. I sat down. The kettle started to whistle and I didn't move. I just sat there in my kitchen in Guelph, Ontario on a Tuesday evening in November, holding a legal document that said I had caused my daughter and her husband to fear for their safety and their right to quiet enjoyment of their home. I was 67 years old. I had worked at the same pharmacy counter for 19 years. I baked raisin scones on Sunday mornings. I called first. I always called first. And my daughter was telling a judge I was dangerous. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the before. And the before was so ordinary, so quietly painful, that I almost didn't notice it happening until it was already done. When my daughter, I'll call her by her relationship to me, because that's all she is, my daughter was growing up. It was just the 2 of us. Her father left when she was 4. I won't say much about that except that I worked 3 jobs across 2 years to keep our house in Guelph, and by the time she was in high school, I had built something stable. Nothing fancy. A semi-detached on the street with big maples. A job with benefits. A pantry that was always full. She was bright. Quietly stubborn the way some kids are, but bright. She got into Wilfrid Laurier on a partial scholarship, and I made up the rest with my savings. I didn't tell her how much it cost. I didn't want her to feel the weight of it. That was probably my first mistake. I was always trying to protect her from the weight of things. She met her husband in her 3rd year. He was from a family in Oakville, the kind of family that has a dog on Lake Ontario and sends Christmas cards with a professional photo. He was polite when I met him, shook my hand firmly, said all the right things. My daughter looked at him the way you look at something you've decided you want. And I actually thought, good for her. Good for her for finding someone solid. They got married in September, 4 years after they graduated. A small ceremony at a vineyard near Niagara-on-the-Lake. I paid for the flowers and the rehearsal dinner. My daughter never asked me to. I offered because I wanted to. Because that's what I knew how to do. The first years were fine. I visited on Sunday afternoons, maybe twice a month. I brought things, soup when my daughter was sick, seedlings for their backyard garden in the spring, Christmas baking in December. My son-in-law was courteous, a little distant, but I told myself that was just his way. Some people are like that. I didn't push. When my grandson was born 2 years into the marriage, I took 2 weeks off work to help. I slept on their pull-out couch. I did the nighttime feeds when my daughter needed to sleep. I organized their freezer with meals I'd made ahead of time. I held that baby boy and felt something I hadn't felt since my daughter herself was small. Like purpose. Like being exactly where I was supposed to be. I thought that would bring us closer. It did, for a while. But even then I noticed things. Small things. My son-in-law would come home and look at the kitchen. I'd reorganize the spice rack one afternoon while the baby slept, and something would move across his face. Not gratitude. Something else. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was imagining it. The call started to get shorter. My daughter would answer, and I could hear something in the background, not noise exactly, more like tension. And she'd say, "Mom, can I call you back?" And sometimes she would, and sometimes she wouldn't. Then one spring, when my grandson was about 18 months old, I drove over on a Saturday with a bag of groceries. They'd mentioned the week before that they were going up to my son-in-law's family's place in Muskoka for the long weekend, and I thought I'd drop off some things so they'd have fresh food when they got back. Milk. Bread. A container of chicken stew I'd made. I had a key. My daughter had given it to me after my grandson was born in case of emergencies. I let myself in. Left the groceries on the counter. left a note on the fridge that said, "Welcome home, love Mom," locked up and left. That was apparently the beginning of the end. My son-in-law called me that evening. His voice was careful in a way that made me grip the phone. He said that they had not given me permission to enter their home while they were away. He said it felt like a violation of their space. He said they needed me to agree to call before any visit, without exception, and never use the key unless it was a genuine emergency involving my grandson's safety. I apologized. I meant it. I understood. I told him I would call. I would always call. But something had shifted, and I felt it. The way you feel weather changing before the sky shows it. Over the next year, the visits shrank, from twice a month to once, from once a month to 6 weeks. I would call and my daughter would say they were busy, or my grandson had a cold, or they had plans with friends. I stopped dropping things off without asking. I texted before I came. I waited for confirmation. I did everything they asked. Still, it kept shrinking. My grandson turned 3. I was not invited to his birthday party. My daughter told me after the fact, something small, just family. She said, her husband's family. When I asked carefully whether I might have come, she paused and said, "Mom, it's just complicated right now." I asked what was complicated. She didn't answer directly. She said they needed space. She said she knew I meant well, but that sometimes my help felt overwhelming. She said I had to understand that this was their family now. I heard that and I thought I understood. I thought, back off. Give them room. Let them come to you. So I did. For 3 months I barely called. I waited. I kept busy with work, with my friend who lives down the street, with the small garden I keep in my backyard. I planted tomatoes and told myself this was temporary. They did not come to me. In September of that year, my grandson was now 3.5, and I had not seen him in 11 weeks. I received a letter from a family lawyer. It said that my daughter and her husband were formally requesting that I cease all unannounced contact, cease sending gifts to their home without prior agreement, and cease attempting to establish direct communication with my grandson outside of supervised visits to be arranged at their discretion. I stood at my mailbox in my housecoat and read that letter twice. I had sent my grandson a card for his birthday with a $50 savings bond from TD. That was apparently one of the violations. I called my oldest friend. I've known her since we were in our 20s. She lives in Hamilton now. And I read her the letter over the phone. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Evelyn, you need a lawyer." That was the first time I'd heard my own situation described as something requiring legal defense. I had thought of it as a misunderstanding, something that could be fixed over coffee, over honesty, over 2 women who loved each other finding their way back. I had not yet understood what my daughter and her husband had already decided. I hired a family lawyer, a woman who practiced in Guelph, the kind of person who listened without expression and wrote everything down in the yellow notepad. I sat across from her and explained the whole thing, and at the end she looked at me and said, "Mrs. Calloway, does your daughter believe you have harmed her in some specific way?" I said I didn't know. She said we should find out. The disclosure process. I learned a lot of legal vocabulary that year. Revealed that my son-in-law had been keeping notes. Dates, times, what I brought, how long I stayed. He had documented the spice rack. He had documented the groceries. He had documented 3 occasions where I had, according to his notes, made comments about his parenting that he found undermining. I read those notes and I recognized the events, but not the version of them. In his version, I was a pattern of intrusion. In my version, I was a mother trying to stay connected to her child. I think both things were true, and I think that was the tragedy of it. The peace bond application came 3 months later. The legal threshold for a peace bond in Ontario requires demonstrating that the applicant has reasonable grounds to fear for their safety or the safety of their household. My lawyer told me this plainly. She also told me that the standard of proof was not high and that courts often erred on the side of granting them in family situations. I thought about my grandson, about the last time I had held him, which was a Sunday in June at a park near their house, a supervised visit that my daughter had arranged. 2 hours, her sitting on a bench 20 feet away. He had called me Grandma Evie and showed me a pine cone he'd found and asked me why squirrels had fluffy tails. I had told him it kept them warm and helped them balance. He had accepted this and moved on, the way children do, and I had watched him and thought, this is enough. This can be enough. But in court that fall, I sat at a table across from my daughter, and her husband and I looked at my daughter and tried to find the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. The woman across from me was composed. Her posture was perfect. She read from a prepared statement that said she had experienced significant emotional distress as a result of what she described as my persistent boundary violations over a period of 6 years. She didn't look at me once. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She reviewed the documentation on both sides. She asked my son-in-law to clarify one point, the incident with the groceries, and he explained again about the violation of their space, the use of the key, the feeling of being monitored. The judge listened. Then she turned to my daughter. She said, "Your mother testified that she reorganized a spice rack and restocked your refrigerator. In 6 years, has your mother ever threatened you?" My daughter said no. "Has she ever used physical force against you or your husband?" No. "Has she ever communicated to you or your husband in a way that could reasonably be interpreted as threatening?" A pause. Then, no. The judge set down her papers. She looked at my daughter and her husband for a long moment. Then she said that the evidence presented did not meet the threshold for a peace bond, and that the application would not be granted. She said that a grandmother's desire to remain present in her grandchild's life, however imperfectly expressed, did not constitute grounds for legal protection. Then she said something else. She said it quietly, almost as if she was speaking to herself as much as to the courtroom. She said, "I hope, for the sake of the child involved, that this family finds a way to communicate that doesn't require a courtroom." My son-in-law sat very still. My daughter blinked at the table. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I had wanted, somewhere inside me, for there to be a moment where things became clear, where someone looked at the situation and said, "This woman is not dangerous. She is a mother. She is a grandmother. She loves you." And that had happened in its legal way. But my daughter did not reach across the aisle for my hand. She gathered her papers, and her husband put his hand on the small of her back, and they walked out. I sat with my lawyer for a few minutes. She patted the table, which I understood as her version of comfort. Then I drove home alone on the 401 and stopped at a Tim Hortons in Milton because I needed something ordinary. I ordered a medium double-double and sat by the window and watched the traffic and let myself feel it. All of it. The exhaustion and the grief and the strange, quiet relief of having been witnessed by someone who didn't know me at all. What I didn't know on that drive home was what my granddaughter was doing at that exact moment. My daughter also has a daughter, my granddaughter, who was 6 that year, just starting grade 1. I had spent less time with her than with my grandson because she was born during the years when the distance had already started. But we had our own small thread. She called me Grammy. She liked when I painted her nails. She once fell asleep in my car on the way home from the science center, and I sat in the driveway for 40 minutes rather than wake her up. 3 weeks after the court date, I received something in the mail. A pink envelope with stickers on the back. Inside was a piece of folded paper, the kind from a school notebook. And on it, in wobbly 6-year-old printing, it said, "I miss you, Grammy. Do you still have the purple nail polish?" At the bottom, she had drawn a cat. There was no return address. My daughter does not know, to this day, how that letter found me. I suspect my granddaughter asked someone at school to help her write my address because she remembered it from the Christmas cards I used to send. Children notice more than we think they do. I kept that letter in the top drawer of my nightstand. I still have it. I did not respond directly. I knew that would only complicate things. But I did, through my lawyer, request a formal visitation arrangement for both grandchildren, which is my right under Ontario family law regardless of the parents' wishes. That process is still ongoing. It is slow and it is expensive, and there are weeks when I wonder if I have the energy left for it. But then I think of my granddaughter's handwriting. I miss you, Grammy. Do you still have the purple nail polish? I do. I kept it. There is something I have had to sit with in all the time since, something I did not want to admit but that my honest self kept bringing me back to. My son-in-law is not entirely wrong. I did enter their home without asking. I did reorganize things without permission. I did, more than once, say something about how the children were being handled that landed wrong, even when I meant it with love. I am not a patient woman. I am a woman who solves problems by doing things, and sometimes the thing I did was not mine to do. I have had to learn the difference between love and the doing of love. That love, real love, sometimes looks like staying in your own kitchen, like waiting by the phone, like letting someone make their own mistakes without appearing at the door with a casserole. I am still learning this. I think I will be learning it for the rest of my life. But I also know this. The morning after the court date, I woke up at 6 and made myself breakfast and sat at my kitchen table in the November light, and outside in the backyard the maple tree had dropped almost all of its leaves except for a few at the very top, orange-red against the gray sky. Holding on, and I thought, that's it. That's what I'm doing. I am holding on, not because I refuse to let go of things that are finished, but because I know in the way you know your own heartbeat that this is not finished. My daughter is not gone from me. She is somewhere inside the woman who sat across from me in that courtroom, the woman with the perfect posture and the prepared statement. She is in there. The way she used to be in there on the bad days when she was 17 and furious, and I could see her hurting and she wouldn't let me near it. I waited then. I can wait now. I have the purple nail polish. I have the letter with the cat drawing. I have a grandson who called me Grandma Evie and asked me about squirrel tails in a park on a Sunday in June. And I have myself, which, at 67, after everything, turns out to be enough to build on. I keep thinking about the spice rack. Not the courtroom, not the lawyer's fees, not the letter with the legal letterhead sitting on my kitchen table. The spice rack. Because that's where it started, really. Not with malice, not with control, but with a woman who saw a mess and fixed it without asking if she should. That was me. That has always been me. I spent a long time after all of this telling myself I had done nothing wrong. And in the legal sense, the judge agreed. But I've learned, slowly and not always gracefully, that being found not guilty in a courtroom doesn't mean you've been honest with yourself in the kitchen. There's a difference between what the law says about your actions and what you know, in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, about your intentions. What I know now is this. The love was real, and some of the doing of the love was wrong. Not cruel. I was never cruel. But love that doesn't listen is still love that doesn't listen, and my daughter felt it as pressure even when I meant it as warmth. That's a hard thing to sit with. I've been sitting with it for 2 years. What kept me from falling apart in those 2 years was not any grand philosophy. It was smaller than that. It was my friend in Hamilton who told me to get a lawyer when I still thought I could fix this with a phone call. It was the yellow notepad on my lawyer's desk. It was my own stubbornness, and I will call it that plainly, not resilience, not strength, just the particular stubbornness of a woman who raised a child alone and paid a mortgage alone and has not yet learned how to give up on the people she loves. There's something about going through something like this that either breaks your judgment or sharpens it. I think what it sharpened in me was the ability to tell the difference between holding on and holding tight. I was holding tight for years, to my role, to my access, to the version of my daughter I knew before her husband's family became her primary world. Holding tight looks like love from the inside. From the outside, apparently, it looks like a pattern of intrusion. I had to develop a kind of wisdom I didn't know I was missing. The wisdom of restraint, of asking before doing, of understanding that the most generous thing you can sometimes offer is your absence, your patience, your willingness to wait at the edge without forcing your way in. That's not weakness. For someone like me, it is genuinely the hardest thing. And my granddaughter's letter, That small pink envelope with the stickers and the cat drawing, that is what I come back to when the waiting gets heavy. She found me. A 6-year-old figured out my address and found the words and sent them, because that's what love does when it's unobstructed. It finds a way. I have the purple nail polish on my bathroom shelf. I look at it sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth. It's a small thing to build a life around, but then again, most of the things worth building a life around are small. I'm still here, still in Guelph, still planting tomatoes in the spring, and I am learning at 67 that showing up with integrity, even when no one is watching, even when it costs you, is the only thing you actually get to keep.